Army did a nice job with that. The Army is always very, very focused on modularity. And so
Right.
they want to have, one type of motor for 10 vehicles. I think it makes a lot of
Right.
sense. It's
Well,
probably,
yeah,
yeah.
all the different variants aside, I mean, yeah, the platform was the same, so it didn't, if if we absolutely had to, you know, a guy that can drive one of them can drive all of them. So if we need something happens and we need to get this from point A to point B, and the guy that normally drives it isn't around, we can still make that happen. We're not
Okay.
Everybody's not standing there trying to have a 20-minute discussion about how you turn it on when things need to be happening. And
Yep.
it was very
That's a great
modular
point.
platform.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wrote an article. I meant to share with you before the interview, but I totally forgot. I wrote an article about Captain Kearns. So Captain Kearns served. I don't know if he was infantry, but he served in Vietnam. I don't know what his MOS was, but he was in combat trying to sustain some of his vehicles. I think, namely the M113. I think that was one of the main vehicles they had in Vietnam, but a variety of different vehicles for different purposes. I'm not an expert on the vehicles that were in service during the Vietnam era, but one of the key problems that the Army faced was all these different fuels. So the Army had a bunch of different mixes of fuels, and they relied on local additives to try to have the right mix and put the right fuel in the right vehicle, and they're always screwing it up. And that's just what was happening. And I'll never forget, I was at a CTC rotation right after you got out of the Army. I had the fortunate to go to another CTC rotation right after we got back. So I walked. So I think one day we were fueling the Strykers at JRTC, and I pull up to the fueler and I say, "Hey, can you fuel up these whatever 8 Strykers that I had right behind me?" And I saw the words jet fuel written across the fuel tanker, jet fuel. And I kind of thought that was strange. Normally you see JP8. And I said,
Right.
"Hey, I don't know if that can go in the Stryker. Is that compatible fuel with the Strykers?" And he looked at me like I was dumb. He was very respectful. He said, he kind of made me feel at ease. He said, "Sir, it'll be just fine. Don't worry about it."
With all
And
due
I
respect,
found out
sir.
late. With all due respect, sir, I was friendly with him. He was a really nice guy. He was working the night shift at a fuel repoint at what was that, Fort Polk, Louisiana. So I feel for him. But the Army switched to one fuel for combat vehicles for both ground systems and aerial systems. So you could put the same fuel in a Stryker that you could in an Apache, which I
Really
thought was super interesting. Yeah. So that
wild.
problem that isn't that wild? Captain Kern, this issue that he had in Vietnam, Captain Kearns, he went on to become General Kearns. And he was in charge of pretty much the Army's entire sustainment plan as a general. And so, he was able to kind of solve the issues that he faced in combat in Vietnam so that you and I didn't have to worry about multiple fuels. I mean, you
Right.
still had to make sure you had all the right other petroleum products and coolants, but those are all color coded for idiots like me. But I thought it was interesting that the Army had the foresight to, and this has been kind of a large, heavy lift for the Army to go to one fuel. That's not easy to do.
Right.
But they basically, the Strykers, they're spec'd out for JP8, but if JP8 is not available, they can also use other forms of diesel fuel. And then obviously there's aviation fuels within the military that are of a higher grade than the typical, fuel that we would get. But I just thought that was really interesting. That was a really, really smart move on the Army's part from a logistics standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, just to keep the wrong fuel from going to the wrong thing. If we can make one fuel that'll run in everything, whatever you've got, pull your Strykers up here and fuel them, or like you said, land your Apache and we'll fuel it if we can. Got to ground
Yeah.
it and fuel it up.
No, 100%. Yeah,
And
100%.
and even from a standpoint, when we were deployed, we didn't have anything but JP8 on anything that ran on anything but JP8 on the cop. The generators and the trucks, that was it. And it was the same truck that fueled everything. Strikers come back from a patrol, stop by the fuel truck, top off, and the same fuel truck got fired up 3 times a day and driven around and topped off all the generators.
Precisely. No, precisely right. And I didn't even think about all the support equipment that was stationary on our combat outpost. I didn't even consider that. That wasn't even that's not even something I wrote about. I'm going to add that into my article. But yeah, I'm going to share the article with you once I'm done with it, because it kind of draws the parallel from there's certain things that combat leaders and combat personnel learn in certain conflicts. And, it seems like we're always, we're making mistakes in the Army. And then the Army does some things that make a lot of sense to support, a global force. And we have footprint that pretty much spans the entire globe. And it's likely that we'll probably have footprints on other planets too, or at least the moon as a near term, home base.